Upon opening the sutra, the Dharma incomparably profound and infinitely subtle is always encountered, but rarely perceived, even in millions of ages. Now we see it, hear it, receive and maintain it. May we completely realize the Tathagata's true meaning.
To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be enlightened by the 10,000 dharmas. To be enlightened by the 10,000 dharmas is to free one's body and mind and those of others. No trace of enlightenment remains, and this traceless enlightenment is continued forever. When one first seeks the truth, one separates oneself from it. When one has already correctly transmitted the truth to oneself, one is one's original self at that moment. When riding on a boat, if one watches the shore, one may assume that the shore is moving. But watching the boat directly, one knows that it is the boat that moves. If one examines the 10,000 dharmas with a deluded body and mind, one will suppose that one's mind and nature are permanent. But if one practices intimately and returns to the true self, it will be clear that the 10,000 dharmas are without self. That's our second section of Genji Koan. Number 2, which happens to be my favorite number. So good evening, all you Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and Sangha treasures, surrounded by treasure. And I usually say something about death. I'm not going to use the future corpses thing, even though I just gave it away. But it was what I heard from Norman Fisher. He had a friend that was about his age, and in her youth, she studied Zen with the great master Song San Ni. And he always said, soon dead, soon dead. Well, Norman said, I understood the words then as being true, very Zen and even a little comical. Now they seem personal and poignant. Norman is 75. I just turned 72 on Saturday. Thank you for the gift of your presence on this really beautiful fall evening here at the Zen Center of Los Angeles, Great Dragon Mountain, Buddha Essence Temple. The persimmons are turning. Hopefully those of you that have been walking the grounds have seen that. I counted 3 birds of paradise blooming at the front gate by Sensei Encho's tree, perhaps guarding the temple. and our autumn winds. The winds, especially yesterday, really gave new meaning to Priest Baoche of Magu Mountains' fanning story that comes at the end of the Genjo Koan. But these same winds have fanned a fire up north of Santa Barbara. 101 was closed, both directions last night. As I understand, it's still closed. We even have up in San Luis Obispo, where I live, we have frost warnings on top of all this. So our theme this practice period is on gratitude. And now I'd like to pause and acknowledge, pay respect and gratitude for all of our Native American heritage. Up in the San Luis Obispo, where I live, it's the Northern Chumash. And as we heard last night, and we all know that here in Los Angeles, it's the Tongva Nation. And Roshi shared some really exciting news about things that you're doing here in Los Angeles. So let us place our hands together in Gasho and bowing, acknowledge, and pay deep respect to all of our indigenous peoples, the people of your land, wherever you might be, past, present, and future. And special gratitude for the indigenous peoples who lived in harmony with our earth. May we learn lessons from them before it's too late. Driving down, I realized coming from around the Lompoc area, there's a highway called 154 that goes by Lake Cachuma, and it then drops down into Santa Barbara. Well, I've learned that that's now called the Chumash Highway. And I don't know if that's because the benevolence of the county there or the fact that they raise so much revenue from the casino in Sandy Inez. I'm not sure. But up in our area at Cal Poly, they have all these new dormitories going on, and they have named each of the dormitories with Chumash names. We have a really, really active group up there of Chumash folks. So acknowledgement or recognition is a first step. Saying we're sorry is another step. I know that there's talk of reparations. Can we go further? So, more gratitude. I'm calling for an attitude of gratitude during this practice period. And special thanks to Roshi Shama for the opportunity that we have here for Sesshin and, to do this Genjo Koan study. It's really amazing. And it is, as she said, it's a lifelong process. And I give thanks to Sensei Faith Mine, our abbot, and our families that support us in our practice. Special thanks to Carla. I'm always here for the fall sesshin, and it's our anniversary every time I'm here. Our anniversary will be Saturday. So, Carla, I love you. The winds of change, huh? Lots going on here. Got two seats filled for our head preceptor and priest, Dharma Joy. And Sensei Senshin. incoming head teacher. And a big milestone for Etsugen coming up on Sunday after a wonderful year with you as head trainee. So we're at the end of our second full day of sesshin. And I always ask how people are doing. And it's a little weird this year in that normally I've done, would do a talk later in the week, and I've had face-to-face. So I've checked in with a lot of people. And that hasn't happened yet. I don't begin face-to-face until tomorrow. So I don't really know how you're doing. Here in the Zendo, it feels pretty settled. We have a lot of really seasoned sitters. So it's been solid. So I hope you're taking advantage of sesshin. This is a really, really rare opportunity for your practice, to deepen your practice. As Gary Shishin Wicks, Roshi of Great Mountain Zen Center in Colorado, many of us know Shishin Roshi, he says, sesshin is where the magic really happens. Are you feeling the magic yet? This is our practice. And it's a pretty laid-back schedule compared to what it has been when we're open. Roshi had addressed that, you know, the later start times and all that. And it's interesting. And if you want the other side of the story, Roshi Ryodo turned me on to a book last year, Eat, Sleep, Sit, My Year at Japan's Most Rigorous Zen Temple by Nanomura. If you get a chance, read it. What a training schedule. I wanted to stop and make some general comments about the Genjo Koan, which one translator said means to answer the question from true reality through the practice of our everyday activity. So when I first approached the Genjo Koan and Dōgen Zenji in general, what came to mind was our beloved Heart Mirror's famous words. And at the Hosen ceremonies, he routinely would call out, "Attention, Shuso," or head trainee. I'm confused. And then would go ask his question. You know, we're not alone about being confused, and that Dōgen Zenji can be pretty tough to wade through, especially initially. And we're not alone. Professor Bielefeld at a Dōgen Zenji conference in Stanford said, Dōgen Zenji is not an easy person to live with. When I first started at the Zen Center, many of you will remember Reiju, who was manning the bookstore. She was actually one of the reasons I kept coming back. She would always reach out to me, always, every time I was here, and stir up a conversation. So I was in there, you know, a young student, on fire, and so I bought the 4-book series of the Shobo Genzo, the old Nishijima and Cross translation that was back then was kind of the only one we had here. It was before Kaz Tanahashi, you know, did his work. So Reiju, when I was buying it, she kind of raised an eyebrow and said, it's pretty heady stuff. I don't know that you want to start with that. Undaunted, I began reading a fascicle every day. I was confused. But over the years, I've become more and more comfortable, more and more connected to the Genjo Koan. And it continually opens up things for me every time I read it. When Roshi Gyoku had said that we were going to do the Genjo Koan, I was all excited anyway, but started a practice of reading it every day as I did my own studies. And this may sound funny, but what came up to is Keats' famous quote about a thing of beauty is a joy forever. And this Genjo Koan, written so long ago, continues to nurture us today and will continue to do so in the future. I have a friend in Europe who said this was like the turning words for her, and had an awakening. And it's changed her life. And she's incorporated the Genjo Koan into her weekly liturgical services. I liken reading Dōgen Zenji to our koan studies. As I tell the folks up in San Luis Obispo Zen Circle, when we talk about koans, it takes your thinking mind, your intellectualizing, and runs it into a brick wall. We're always having the rug pulled out from underneath us. Have any of you experienced Roshi doing that? Pulling the rug out from underneath you? A lot of nods. I've also connected it to studying the precepts. Early on, when we dive into the precepts, we look at the three different perspectives. The literal or fundamental, which is the black and white. Don't steal, don't kill, period. Don't be angry. The relational perspective, and that's the subjective meaning or the compassionate spirit of the precepts, characterized by being responsible for cause and effect. That's right out of our manual. And you're weighing in about who, what, when, where, why, the four considerations about the people involved and the amount and all of that. And lastly is the intrinsic perspective. And this is the perspective, no separation. There's no killing. No killer, no one being killed. And that was tough to grapple with for me. I remember doing my essays, and most of them, speaking to the intrinsic, I just kind of said, maybe when I have some kind of awakening, I'll understand it a little bit better. My point is, don't get discouraged. Norman Fisher, again, I had listened to talks. There was a group of teachers and scholars talking about Dōgen Zenji. And Norman Fisher said one of Dogen's, he didn't say Zenji, but I'm just reading it from his writing. One of Dogen's chief purposes is to show you that the conventional, ordinary, taken for granted way of thinking and looking at the world is actually the cause of your being bound and suffering and confused. So rather than saying that to you in the conventional way, he demonstrates it. His language is the undoing of language. That's what makes it difficult or hard to understand on a conventional level. So keep up this study. we're focusing on this piece for the whole practice period. And I encourage you to grab one of the commentaries. I've used a lot of them in this study. Roshi Gyoko, I think, has passed along a lot of references. There is Dōgen's Genjo Koan, 3 commentaries, which was out quite a while ago. And there's 3 different commentaries in that. And then Flowers Fall, Yasutani's work, which has a foreword by Taizan Maizumi. And then Realizing Genjo Koan, the key to Dōgen's Shobogenzo by Shohaku Okamura. Take advantage of this time. All the talks, of course, will be about the Genjo Koan this week, but the study will go beyond this week. To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be verified or enlightened by all beings. To be verified by all things is to let the body and mind of the self and the body and mind of others drop off. So, to study the Buddha way is to study the self. Okamura says this is the most essential point in the teachings of both Shakyamuni Buddha and Dōgen Zenji. Yasutani says in this section, Dōgen Zenji painstakingly shows the sequential order in realizing the way. To identify the original self is the Buddha way. It's interesting. Uchiyama says in this section that when he discusses, Dōgen Zenji discusses the Buddha way, he says that in Genjo Koan, these first sections are the outline. After this section, my section tonight, it goes from the general to the particular. So basically he says this section is a summary of the previous sections, which Roshi Gyoku talked to last night. So if you got that, I don't really have to say anything else because this is just a summary. Uchiyama said in his commentary, just practice the Buddha Dharma for the sake of the Buddha Dharma. This is the way. Since we all, without exception, are living the reality of life, whether we think so or not, whether we believe it or not, we keep carrying out life driving as the reality of life. This is the Buddha way. So as I explored this self, I looked back, remembered the Fukan Zazengi, also by Dōgen Zenji, which he wrote after his return from China. And he says, you should therefore cease from practice based on intellectual understanding, pursuing words and following after speech, and learn the backward step that turns your light inwardly to illuminate yourself. Body and mind of themselves will drop away, and your original face will manifest. If you want to attain suchness, you should practice suchness without delay. So who's doing the studying? Who is this self? We hear so much in our liturgy and writings about no self. The Heart Sutra, no eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind. In the Denkoroku, one of our collections of koans, which is the so-called awakening experiences in our lineage. There's a story of a Chinese master in our lineage, Tungshang Liangjie. When he was just a young boy, he heard the Heart Sutra. He read the Heart Sutra. His teacher had him do that. And when he reached the place where it says, there is no eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, or mind, he suddenly felt his face with his hand. And he asked his teacher, I have eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and the rest. Why does the scripture say that they do not exist? Can you relate? I don't see a lot of humor in Dōgen Zenji when I read him. But Roshi Bernie has introduced clowning. As he said, my Zen students are too serious. So lest we, take ourselves too seriously. There is a great book called Zen Judaism by David Bader. And David is a Zen practitioner from his Jewish tradition. And it's the funniest book. I really recommend it. So he has a line in there. He said, if there is no self, then whose arthritis is this? And as funny as that may sound, that really kind of captures the practice, right? And what Roshi was talking about, alluding to, pointing directly to last night, the uniqueness and our Buddha nature manifesting. So I have arthritis. I can still be a Buddha. I still am a Buddha. And you are a Buddha and have Buddha nature. And you are unique. Yamada Roshi, I've mentioned this a number of times, and many of you have read his commentaries on some of our koan collections, and he always talks about the fraction, the numerator and denominator. Numerator is all phenomena, everything, the podium, Jitsujo, everything, you and me, the candle on the altar. And the denominator, emptiness. And when we speak of it, we speak of the fraction to talk about it. The phenomenal, the absolute. The big point, the underscore is it's the whole fraction. Exactly what Roshi said last night. It's the whole enchilada, so to speak. So do you see a pattern here in our teachings? We get this all the time from our sutras, from the teachers. But it's not about intellectually understanding it. It's about living it, doing it, living our everyday life. Okamura has in his book a really great piece about the word steady. First, of course, we usually have our own concept of it. You know, I'm a PhD in physics. I study physics books. Yeah. But the original Japanese word that's translated as steady in the sentences in the Genji Koan is naro. Now, naro originated from the word nariru, which means to get accustomed to. Hopefully my pronunciation is good. To get accustomed to become familiar with, to get used to, or to become intimate with. So naro refers to more than simply the intellectual study of something. Narao? Actually, well, maybe that's the pronunciation I must have got. Must have been French. I even looked it up. So it gets better. The kanji for this, the upper symbol, is for the wings, a symbol for the wings of a bird. And the other part of the kanji is for self. So this means to study something in the way a baby bird studies how to fly from its parents. This is the original meaning of to study, as it's used in Master Dōgen's to study the self. So how does that transfer? How does that translate into our practice? We have to do the work. We have to do zazen. We have to sit on our cushions. Yasutani said, to study oneself, what must one endeavor to do? What is essential is to throw away one's own views and oneself, to throw away all one's acquired affectations, which are the knowledge and experience that you accumulate since birth, and to bring oneself into accord with the teachings of the Buddhas and ancestors. That's the important thing, the important thing. Doesn't that sound like our not knowing? To study the self is to forget the self. Yasutani said that to forget oneself is not to fall victim to amnesia. It's to throw away all former knowledge and views and to become a pure white sheet of paper. That's to forget oneself. It's a clean slate. Again, it's our tenet of not knowing. And the next line, to forget the self, is to be verified or enlightened by all beings. I wrote a poem some time ago, and a few of the lines were, the longer I do this practice, the more I'm in awe and amazement of the 10,000 things, even the mundane, perhaps especially the mundane. These myriad dharmas, the 10,000 things, are what? Everything. So it's easy to be in awe and amazement of majestic peaks and beautiful blue rivers, the ocean, blossoming flowers, the back bay where I walk all the time, and Los Osos where I live. But the mundane, our everyday routine, sometimes we feel uneventful life, a life where weeds grow. Yes. To be verified by all things is to let the body and mind of the self and the body and mind of others drop off. Now, there's a well-known story, again, in the Denkoroku, Transmission of Light, the story of Eihei Dōgen's awakening. So he's in China, and he's with his teacher, Rujing. And the story goes, basically, that Rujing's walking around the zendo, and there's a monk that's fallen asleep. And he comes up to that monk, who happens to be sitting next to Dōgen Zenji, and he says, Zazen is dropping off body and mind. Why are you just sleeping? And I hear reports that they had some unbelievable devices to stay awake. Things with chin rests, so they could continue to sit in Zazen. Imagine that. I don't know if any of you have tried to sit all night. I have. We've tried that, right? And we didn't make it the entire night. I can't imagine. So, hearing this, the koan goes, the master was greatly awakened. He goes to the abbot's room, Rujing's room, and burns incense. And then they have their famous exchange there. Rujing asks, why are you burning incense? The master, Dōgen Zenji, answered, body and mind have dropped off. Rujing said, body and mind have dropped off, the dropped off body and mind. This is a temporary ability. You must not approve me without reason, Dōgen Zenji asked. Rujing said, I am not approving you without reason. The master asked, why are you not approving me without reason? Rujing said, you dropped off body and mind. The master bowed. Rujing said, you have dropped off, dropping off. Rujing's attendant, Huang Ping of Fuchao, said, it's no small thing for a foreigner to experience this realm. Rujing said, how many here have gotten it? Liberated, he is mild and peaceful, and the thunder roars. The Genjo Koan is Master Dōgen's roaring thunder. Now, there are many scholars that think that this was actually made up, this story, by Master Keizan Jokin, who was the compiler of these awakening stories. Dōgen Zenji doesn't actually speak of this incident or experience in the Shobogenzo. He does, however, speak often about dropping off body and mind throughout his works. And what's funny, there's even some scholars that think Master Dōgen misunderstood Rujing's dropping off of body and mind, saying, well, you know, he's Japanese, he wasn't really Chinese. And there's another phrase called dropping off mind dust that appears to be almost the same thing. But Okamura thinks that this is really not possible. When Dōgen Zenji was in China, he kept a journal when he was meeting with his teachers and of his travels. And so there are some distinct discussions about dropping off body and mind. And it just makes a lot of sense. And I've read some of those translations. It just makes a lot of sense that if Rujing thought Dōgen Zenji got it wrong, he would certainly have said something. So Okamura didn't think he got it wrong. And I agree with him. So this dropping off body and mind, Rujing, Dōgen Zenji's teacher, said, Sanzen is dropping off body and mind, and dropping off body and mind is Zazen. Now, he uses, Sanzen is oftentimes thought of as the face-to-face, like Dokusan. But in this case, Dōgen Zenji says he's talking about Zazen. I really became intrigued with this body and mind of others. And what's this others? And I'd read some commentaries where they say that, there is no self and there's no others. But in our life of uniqueness, there are others. And how does that look? I was really taken by a story that was shared with me by a good friend, Jason, who's the pastor of the UCC church up in San Luis Obispo. He's in my ministerial association, San Luis Obispo Ministerial Association. And it was a writing by Henry Nouwen in a book called Following the Movements of the Spirit. And he's not a Buddhist. He's a Christian, a theologian, and a pastor who taught psychology and pastoral theology at Notre Dame, Yale, and Harvard. Sensei Myoho might be familiar with him. He said, in my earlier life, community meant a safe and familiar place of belonging, where those not like me simply were not present. I came from a Dutch Catholic family where it was clear who we were and who they were. They were all non-Catholics. They were non-believers. They got divorced or were gay. While we were okay because we believed the right teachings and lived a moral life. My family, my community, my seminary, and my church felt very safe and secure because the patterns and expectations were so clearly defined. Gradually, after I was teaching at Yale and Harvard, my fences and defenses began falling away. I learned from my students that God was greater than my Roman Catholic conceptions and spiritual community broader than I had previously assumed. He arrives at, it's an institution called L'Arche. It's in Canada. And he says, bang, bang, bang. My whole worldview crumbled. And he actually had a breakdown, writing that his worldview was challenged, his expectations were shattered, and his emotional life torn apart. It is a frightening thing, he wrote, when boundaries are pushed out and walls break down. How could the non-believer be more believing than the believer? The outsider wiser than the insider? How could those without resources have something valuable to share? Slowly, I came to realize that the differences between Catholic and Protestant, Christian and Buddhist, religious and secular, were not the kind of differences I thought they were. That there was a deeper unity below the surface of distinction. Over time, he wrote, I reconstructed my worldview in light of my new vision of community as a place of forgiveness and celebration, where we are more similar than different. I came to realize that the differences between people with disabilities and those with different abilities just wasn't there anymore. that I could love those with physical and intellectual challenges because I had my own set of disabilities. I could be close to people in pain because somehow they revealed my pain to me. No longer did I have to compare myself with others by carving out a little niche and distinguishing myself. I'm called to go to the center where I realize my solidarity with all human beings. The chapter that this is taken from is called From Exclusion to Inclusion. So did you hear the part about my fences and defenses falling away? That sound familiar? Body and mind dropping away. What's your worldview? Who's in your circle? Henry Nauman, he became a senior pastor at L'Arche, Daybreak in Toronto, Canada. And it's a community where men and women with intellectual disabilities and their assistants create a home for one another. Henry's not a Buddhist. He's a bodhisattva. Still, we're unique. Ministerial Association, I always say we celebrate our differences. We don't just tolerate them. I'll end with a short poem written by Kosho Uchiyama Roshi, which I found after Roshi's talk last night that really spoke to me. All of us are always living in the present moment, the profundity of the present moment. Even when we don't know it and are blind to it, the profundity of the present moment is embracing us as the present moment. All of us are living out of the self-interpenetrating whole world, the profundity of the self-interpenetrating whole world. Whether we know it or not, even when we doubt it and reject it, still, we are the self-interpenetrating whole world, including delusions and doubts. Thus is the present moment of the self-interpenetrating whole world, fanning the wind of the profundity of life. Right now and right here is Genjo Koan. The ordinary profundity of the present moment becoming the present moment.
Inexhaustible delusions, I vow to end them. Boundless dharmas, I vow to practice them. Unsurpassable Buddha way, I vow to embody it. Numberless beings, I vow to serve them. Impossible delusions, I vow to end them. Boundless dharmas, I vow to practice them. Unsurpassable Buddha way, I vow to embody.